But if there's a real biochemical fundamental basis for your issue, then being told that there's nothing wrong with you is not really reassuring. I would say it's the opposite. It's like, it's really depressing, because it's, okay, so now what? Now what am I supposed to do?
Welcome to the Rejuvenate Podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I am here with my co-host, Elwin Robinson. And today we are talking about testing. Most recently, we did an episode on genetic insights and genetic reports for people's health and wellness. So Elwin, today I know we're going to talk about all different sorts of testing, because there are lots of people out there that seem to be really sick, need battery upon battery of tests, and et cetera, et cetera. And then those that are quote unquote very well, and doctors say that they're all fine, and are really only using tests for optimization. So I want to open this up to you so that we can dig deep on all the different tests that are out there, and you can share with us your experience. So take it away. Tell me, enlighten me on the tests, on all the tests that are out there.
Well, yeah, this is a great topic to talk about. As you said, Chrissy, I'm not sure if we'll release it right after the genetic episodes. I think we will, but we'll see. But we're filming after them because we talked about what the best starting place for testing generally is the genetics, because they're so easy to do and they're so cheap compared to other testing, and they're accessible in most of the world, right? So blood tests, urine tests, hair tests, they tend to be more expensive. They tend to be, you have to wait a lot longer in many cases. They tend to be harder to arrange. You're often going to go and get an IV blood draw. Sometimes you need your doctor's permission or some kind of practitioner's recommendation, depending on where you are. Although if you're intent on doing it yourself, there's often ways to, legally circumvent that. But despite all of those difficulties, and despite the fact that it is so much more difficult and expensive generally than doing the genetic testing, I still 100% recommend it. And despite the fact I do not benefit personally from it in any way, we have no affiliate links or anything, but I 100% recommend it. So I often talk about how doing the genetic testing was a turning point in my life. But the truth is, it was the turning point, but it wasn't the final step. I mean, obviously addressing the issues was essential, but in between the genetic testing telling me I had this tendency and addressing the issues, I actually did real tests that validated that issue was definitely there. And so obviously, if a doctor is working with you, often they will do them for exactly that reason, right? Like, for instance, they often won't give you a medication until they've checked that you actually need it. Very reasonable. I think that's a good thing. In fact, if anything, I would say one of the issues with the medical industry is they often give you medications without testing to see if you actually need it and without understanding what your problem is, right? Like, so if you go to a doctor and say, oh, I don't have any motivation or energy to do anything, they'll just give you an antidepressant without doing any tests to see if you are actually depressed, to see if you actually do have low serotonin, or, to see if it's actually low dopamine, or if it's actually low cellular energy, or whatever else might be going on. So I'm a big fan of testing. It's probably the number one thing that has changed in my message from before. I used to teach health before, like a decade ago, and I went away for a while, and I've just been studying and learning for a long time, and I'm back now sharing again. And that's one of the biggest things that switched. Is I used to be more of the kind of intuitive, like listen to your body, kind of work things out from first principles, and now I'm like, you know what, I did that for so long, but more importantly, I saw so many other people doing that and just not getting anywhere. For me, at least, I got somewhere, but then eventually I had to sit back and I had to test to find out what was going on. But I see a lot of people who just struggling, like trying so many solutions without knowing what the problem is. And that's kind of crazy if you really think about it, to put a huge amount of time, money, effort, discipline, struggle, willpower, maybe even go through a lot of discomfort with these solutions, all of which may be good, but none of which may actually be relevant for what you've got going on. Or maybe they're relevant for what you've going on, but they're not the thing you need to start with, right? And I'll definitely give examples of that as we go on. So I'm a huge fan of testing. Now, there are critics of testing, and a lot of their criticisms are valid. So this is a difficult thing to navigate, and so that's why I'm going to try my best in this episode to say, what are the tests which actually are a good idea, that are worth doing, from my understanding and experience. How can you tell? And to address some of the problems, some of the objections that people make about testing. One of the ones I heard, for instance, early on that really put me off is, you can't trust these tests. You send your stuff off to different labs and they give you completely different results. So when I first started to do testing, when I was still skeptical, I actually sent off, and again, I realize not everyone can do this. It's a bit of a privileged position, but I actually sent off to, in some cases 3, but with many cases 2 different labs. And I made sure that they were not just different practitioners that were ultimately sending all to the same place. They were fundamentally different labs for the same test results, and then got them back. And it was interesting. I will say that it was actually pretty accurate and uniform across the board. There was not a huge amount of variance, despite coming from completely different labs. So that reassured me, okay, at least for all these markers that I'm checking, it's fairly uniform, it's fairly accurate. And that was actually also validated later when I found very high levels of lead in my blood, which we'll talk about, and we have talked about. Then I went to my NHS GP and said, could this be why I've been having these symptoms? And he just shrugged and go, yeah, could be, without any kind of interest in it. But what he did is they don't, in our nationalised health service in the UK, they don't trust lab results from any other lab. So they did their own test. And again, they saw a very similar level of lead in my blood as the private lab had done. So all of these kind of experiences told me that actually, if we're talking about real tests, and when I say real tests, I'm a lot more skeptical of some tests than others. I have nothing against energy medicine and all that kind of stuff, but I'm not going to validate that today as real testing, because with those kind of tests, like I won't name any because I don't want to call anyone out or upset anyone, but I've done many of those tests, and you literally do it and then you do it again and it gives you completely different results. This is not reliable as far as I'm concerned. Whereas, as I said, with blood testing, urine testing, I tend to find it's significantly more accurate and very, very helpful.
Fantastic. Yes. It's one of those things, you got to look to know is one of the things that it's otherwise you just kind of throwing stuff at it and you have no idea if it's going to work or not, potentially. And like you mentioned, sometimes those things can do more damage than good. Go
let me ask you actually, Chrissy, I know you're so enthusiastic about this topic that you've ended up doing further education on this. You're doing a certification in it now. So what was it that made you so interested in it, that you wanted to learn more despite your extremely busy schedule?
Well, for me, it really is knowing more, not also having to rely on another individual when you've got your results to be like, what does this mean? So having that education to go, oh yeah, there's this, and just, empowering myself to be able to know and to be able to read the results on that. And also too, it's getting to, which when, we started talking about doing this, is about getting to the real root cause of stuff. And so by doing the testing, you're taking a deeper look, you're, essentially looking under the hood. And it just, I went to, school for science. I love science. The human body is my passion. I love it. I think it's incredibly smart, smarter than any of us, and it's always going to be working. So what's happening for it to not be working well? And what are the things that we can potentially be doing to help it along? Because it's just, I'm fascinated by it. So that was my, wanting to go deeper with it, just because there's so much information that our body is trying to tell us, but yet we're not able to understand or know really what it means. So that's why I wanted to do that.
And I was speaking to someone earlier who's, very experienced in this area and very intuitive, and they seem to be, they seem to have a good sense of things, and their readings were accurate as far as I was concerned, based on real testing and stuff. But I still think, even in that case, even if someone is extremely intuitive, even if someone has a very good track record, there's still something about just the culture that we're in is so kind of rational focused, and so kind of deifies science in the same way that religion used to be the one way of seeing things that's not questionable, right? Otherwise it's heresy. We almost have that with science these days. You can't question science, which of course is a contradiction in terms, but that's where we're at right now. So we're kind of constantly programmed that science is the only way of perceiving reality. And so I think even if you are very intuitive, and if you do have a good track record of knowing what's going on just through that, there's still something extremely helpful and validating to have that scientific support for your understanding. And of course, the thing about anything, including intuition and including sometimes tests, is that they can be wrong, right? Your intuition can be wrong, and just like testing sometimes can be wrong. So it is also helpful to just check. But yeah, like if you have a strong intuition for something and then you do the testing and it turns out to be exactly what you felt, it really emboldens you to then see through whatever treatment or whatever you were considering, and also helps you to relate it to other people. Like I could say, I feel like I've got an issue of toxicity. That was what I felt when I first started. I was like, it just seems like my bile is so toxic. It's literally damaging everything that it touches. But it seems like such a crazy notion. And then seeing test results that say, oh, well, that's not proven, but what is proven is that there's extremely high levels of this in my blood, and there's extremely high levels of that in my blood, and that stuff really is toxic. And of course, it's the job of the liver to get out of the blood and put it in the bile, so it's not a crazy idea that would actually happen, right? So it helps to validate the person's experience as well.
Very true, very true. And, this isn't saying anything against the, AMA or anything like that, or any, doctors or anything like that. But like you were saying earlier, there's a lot of times where it is, people don't know what's wrong. And so that's where it's also too, like taking that power into yourself to be your own advocate, as we've expressed on other episodes, because you're the one that your health matters to essentially the most, really and ultimately. And so by, taking that initiative and finding that information, it really does help you to discover and find what is best for you because, for me, it's like, as we've discussed, it's like I want to, when I'm, as I'm aging and growing older, I see how I want my mind to be, how I want my body to be. And I also see a lot out there of how I don't want it to be. And so that's why I think this is so key, which is going to lead me into my next question for you, because essentially, we go to our doctor once a year. We get our annual physical, and we have the regular blood tests that usually come along. And, for many of us, yep, great results. Yep, you're all within range. Yep, okay, see you next year. Everything is fine. So it's like, what are the pitfalls of just taking that only as face value and not really looking further?
It's a good question. Well, I'll ask you a question with a kind of contrarian answer to begin with and say, well, what are the advantages? And I guess the advantage of taking it at face value and just going with it, and this relates to a question you asked before for the genetic thing, is, especially if you have a tendency towards, anxiety and stuff, it's very reassuring to have a doctor say there's nothing wrong with you and then go, oh, that's great. And it absolutely is true that the mind has a powerful effect on your body. We can't say that your mind has a powerful effect on the universe, like the manifestation people teach. I don't think that has been proven conclusively, but it has been proven conclusively and scientifically that it definitely has a powerful effect on the body, which is why you have to do double-blind placebo-controlled trials, because the placebo is so powerful. We talked about that before. I think we should do a whole episode at some point. But anyway, so we know that the mind has a powerful effect on the body. So to be told you're great, you're in great shape, can be a really good thing. However, what about if they're wrong? And also, what about if they're wrong? So what about if they're wrong? So, for instance, there may be, and wrongness is often not necessarily that their reading of the biomarkers is wrong, although that certainly can happen. We talked about that already in the thyroid episodes, about how the reading of the thyroid results is very often wrong if you are concerned about being in the best state possible anyway. If you're just concerned with not dying, then you could say that their readings are accurate. But if you want to feel great, then often it's not the most helpful reading. But a lot of the time, it's more a wrongness of omission, right? It's just they're looking at certain things. And this is true with the thyroid as well. Like they generally only look at TSH, not the other at least 4 markers that I would want to look out for the thyroid. And they're right that there's nothing wrong with that TSH reading, but they may, it may be more relevant that the free T3 is low, or it may be more relevant that the thyroid antibodies are high. Those are real issues that you're not seeing because you're not even testing for it. Then the other example is when you know there's something wrong, right? You're like, well, and this is where the opposite of what I said to begin with is true. So if you feel fine, like there's nothing wrong in your experience, and you go to a doctor and they say there's nothing wrong, it's good in a way. As I said, it emboldens the mind to have a positive view of the body. But if you know you've got a problem, and it doesn't necessarily have to be physical, it could be mental, right? Or psychological, right? I feel depressed, I feel anxious all the time, or I can't think clearly. It could be like a thing that's often ascribed to the brain, as well as the obvious, right? Like I keep getting recurring chronic infections, I keep getting sinusitis, I keep getting UTIs, I keep getting gastrointestinal disturbance or whatever it might be. If you have those issues, and then, or I keep having chronic pain. If you have those issues and then a person says there's nothing wrong with you, that's not good news, because if your symptoms are entirely based on kind of emotions, I suppose it can be. Like sometimes we just manifest these symptoms because of unaddressed emotions. We talked about it a bit in the chronic pain episode. So in that case, it can be useful for someone to say there's nothing wrong with you. But if there's a real biochemical fundamental basis for your issue, then being told that there's nothing wrong with you is not really reassuring. I would say it's the opposite. It's like, it's really depressing, because it's, okay, so now what? Now what am I supposed to do, right? And that's where we then have to go into alternative realms of things that would sometimes rightly and sometimes wrongly be called pseudoscience by most of the mainstream. This is where we might be aligning our chakras or getting energy healing, or all of that kind of stuff, because we're like, well, the world of science has failed me. I feel bad. The science tells me I'm fine. The science is wrong. So what else is there out there? And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Energy medicine and emotional healing and all of that stuff absolutely does help people. So I'm not saying it's bad, but I think saying that science is not able to help is throwing the baby out of the bathwater, because, and I've been guilty of this, because in fact, if we do the right kind of science, it's extremely helpful. But we just have to have the kind of science that actually helps, which is what I want to talk about in this episode.
Yeah, I do think it's a big medicine wheel of many things, not discounting energy medicine or energy work or spiritual work, things like that. And then there's also, the biochemical aspects within our bodies, the nutritional support or the other things. And as we've discussed in previous episodes, toxicity levels and things like that. So I wanted to ask you, Elwin, what are the type of tests that you personally have utilized on your journey in your health?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll break them down. So first of all, I'll do a very quick theoretical breakdown into the kind of things you want to test. And then I'll talk about what order I do it in practice, because obviously what would be nice in theory is often not easily available or cheap or whatever. So in practice, we want to look at our level of building blocks. So this is the stuff that our body is built out of, whether it's proteins and fats, or whether it's vitamins, minerals, that kind of stuff. It's good to know if we need more or less of those. Obviously, as we talked about before, the genetic insights will definitely give you insight as to, you have an increased need for that, or you don't need as much as that. But so that gives you a starting point, and often people do very well just following that because it's often right. But especially if you've got a real serious issue, you want to dig into and know, right? You don't want to think it's probably a good idea to have more of this. You want to know, am I actually low in this? So that's one thing. Another thing is toxins, as you just said, Chrissy. Toxins is often a very tricky thing to deal with, but it can be done in terms of just testing, let alone dealing with it. Next thing is hormones and neurotransmitters. I guess I put them in the same category. So this is related to the function of our whole body and also how we feel. I won't introduce that in detail. We did a whole episode on hormones that people can check out, and we did. I don't know if it'll be out yet, but we've recorded episodes on feeling good and all the chemicals involved in that. So there's that, and then there's organ and gland function. So I classify that slightly different from, so hormones is the stuff that the glands make that we can measure and test. And then there are indicators about how different organs, systems, and glands are functioning. And so that last one I said, I probably actually want to start with that first when it comes to testing, because that's the classic stuff that medical tests will test. Often not well, but we'll talk about that. And it's also what other systems will test, right? If you go to an Ayurvedic doctor, they'll go, how are your organs doing in one way or another? If you go to a Chinese medicine doctor, they'll go, how are your organs doing? So, that's often a good starting point. So there's kidney health biomarkers. Usually there's like creatinine and EGFR. We don't have to go into all of these terms, but these are like things that are commonly tested. There's liver health biomarkers, bilirubin, ALT, ALP. These are like common biomarkers that they'll do. There's blood cell markers, both red and white blood cells, which indirectly tell us how other systems are doing, especially like the spleen and the bone marrow. So it's testing those organs as well as the cardiovascular system. So in terms of the red blood cell, we usually, there's a bunch of different measurements for that, often called a CBC, a complete blood count, with things like the red cell count, mean corpuscular volume, mean corpuscular hemoglobin, a bunch of stuff like that. Basically seeing how the red blood cell's doing, usually looking for anemia when they're doing that. Then there's tests for how the white blood cells are doing. So again, usually there's a count of them, and then it's levels of neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, maybe other ones. So that's commonly tested. And this is, everything I said so far is totally commonly tested in mainstream medicine, right? That's why I'm starting with that. This is the easiest to get. We don't have those yearly tests over here, Chrissy, but in America, you said, people often, they're just done once a year, maybe by the insurance company or whatever. So this is stuff you may already have. You can look it up in an email or something from your doctor, or you can request it from your doctor. Other stuff that they commonly do is cholesterol status, absolutely. I'm talking mainly about blood tests, but I'll just, give an honorary mention here to high blood pressure. Blood pressure reading is something that's important. We talked in another episode about how a higher than average pulse is not necessarily a bad thing. It may just be an indicator that your metabolism is running higher than the average, and the average is too low. But certainly having blood pressure above a certain level can really indicate an issue. And it's a serious issue. It's an early sign of heart disease, which is the number one killer in the world. So I wouldn't discount blood pressure. But along with blood pressure, there's cholesterol, different types of cholesterol, HDL, LDL. And there's a lot of argument about whether these are really problems in themselves or whether they are more a response to a problem. It's a debate I won't get into here. We've recorded an episode on cardiovascular health. Don't know if it'll be out yet, but check out that one for my take on that. Triglycerides. But again, let's say if your cholesterol's high, it's pretty common. Again, I won't talk about how to deal with that right now, but I will say it's an indicator of a problem. Now, does that mean that we want to lower the cholesterol with drugs? Obviously, talk to your doctor about that. If your doctor doesn't think so, then nor do I. I don't think that's necessarily, but we could ask ourselves, well, why is that high in the first place? And we have attempted to answer that question in some of the other episodes that we've recorded. So those are things that commonly test. Clotting status is often the case because clots, actually what leads to a heart attack or a stroke is often not plaque, arterial plaque. It's actually a clot going out of control. So that's why clotting is commonly tested. There's some other stuff like inflammation markers, CRP. Even the one that's called high sensitivity CRP is actually not that high sensitivity. You can still find people who have quite a lot of inflammatory issues where it's extremely low. So it's not high sensitivity, but if it is raised, it's like you've got an inflammation problem. So at least it tells you that. And to be honest, that's the case of most of the ones I've just talked about, just seeing if I have missed any before I comment on this category. Oh yeah, diabetes, that's the other one. So usually is A1C or HbA1c as it's called over here. And then sometimes there's fasting insulin, fasting glucose, stuff like that. The A1C is the one that tells you how high your glucose has been in general over the last few months. So that's the better predictor of having a high blood sugar disease or being closer to it than you would like. So for all of those tests, I would say the reference ranges are created by like governments and or insurance companies and or medical bodies to predict serious disease that's going to need expensive treatment and death. They're not created, and that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that they've just taken the total amount of people and they've said, what's the average? And they've said, that's what it should be. Now, if your population that you're doing that to is healthy, this makes sense. But for instance, in the US, where is it over 50% of people are obese now?
It's creeping up.
Something like that. I can't remember the exact stat. It's a lot. So, and we know that obesity is, it's an indicator. Again, I don't think obesity is a cause of all these diseases. I think it is a sign of an issue which ultimately causes a lot of these diseases. But anyway, it's an indicator that all is not well. Let's put it that way. So why are we using the average range of someone who's obese to determine what it should be? I mean, that's crazy, right? And we talked about this with hormones before as well, how the reference ranges of hormones are based on the average, not the optimal. So that's definitely true of these things. So with diabetes, I wouldn't say that's such a, with HA1C and those markers, I think that they're fairly accurate because you also don't want your sugar to be too low. But with some of them, like the liver enzymes and the kidney health markers, just because those are low and in the reference range does not mean that all is well with that organ. It might mean that you aren't about to have it does mean it's likely that you're not about to have a serious medical condition with that organ, but it doesn't mean that that organ is functioning at an optimal level just because you are in the reference range. It's just not sensitive enough with those. And ditto, the reference range for red blood cells. This was a thing. When I had private blood tests done, it would say I'm just outside the range and have a little bit of anemia. When I have the exact same test done with the exact same results with my NHS doctor, it says you're in range, you're perfect, you're fine, there's nothing wrong with you. So that's, that's an example of you do the reference range to suit what you want, right? Maybe you could argue that the private test people are more likely to make it tighter, hypothetically, because they want people to think there's a problem to keep coming back. On the other hand, the nationalized health service that has to pay for everything is more likely to have it broader because they're like, we don't want to deal with any problem until it's really, really bad, right? And so maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. I don't quite. That's everyone can form their own opinion about that. But I'm saying there's an agenda on both sides, you could say, right? But I would not find those super reliable. So other than that, the other things that are commonly tested by doctors is hormones. And iron. So that's like the organ and system kind of test that I talked about. So there are a few tests that medical doctors would do in the category of building blocks, and there's a few tests that the medical community will do in the category of hormones. Actually, let's do building blocks first. So in terms of building blocks, the only nutrients they're really looking for are those that cause anemia, because anemia is a real issue. And even they don't even look at all the things that can cause anemia, but they tend to look at iron, B12, and folate. Those are the only three things that they test. With a private medical test, you can sometimes test a few more things. You can sometimes test magnesium. You can sometimes test zinc, I see sometimes. There's like a handful of other nutrients that they will do, but it's not a lot. These tests are really worth doing. I highly recommend it because if you have anemia, which is a lack of oxygen getting to every cell of your body, that can cause every problem under the sun. As we talk about in our mitochondrial health episode, if your mitochondria aren't working, that can affect anything and everything. So that is really important to find that out. Again, there's an argument to be made about whether the range is just you'll survive or optimal, but it's something that's worth testing. In the case of hormones, generally the levels they test are not bad. They test a few interesting things. But the reference ranges are really more the problem when it comes to hormones. So depending on whether you're a man or a woman. So for the men, I can see for the test I do regularly, it's DHEA and cortisol. So those are two adrenal hormones. With both of those, I prefer them to be saliva, but we'll talk about that in a bit. But there is a blood test version of it, so we'll test that. And then other than that, it's the sex hormones. So it's estrogen and progesterone, especially in women. Sometimes it's more than one type of estrogen. Usually it's estradiol, which is the most abundant type of estrogen. Sometimes it's the pituitary hormones that stimulate the release of the sex hormones, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And then, there's testosterone. Usually for women, it's a good idea as well, although it's not always included. And then often, especially for men, they'll do free testosterone. And then I don't see this a lot in US tests, but I see it more easily available in the UK. I don't know why, because the only people I've heard about it who are experts are in the US, but whatever, is prolactin. So prolactin, I've talked about in the hormone episodes before, and there's some evidence that, especially in men, the things that we used to blame on low testosterone or an excess estrogen are actually down to excessive levels of prolactin. Prolactin is also a great indicator, even though it's a hormone, it's a great indicator of your level of the crucial neurotransmitter dopamine that I have talked about in other episodes. Basically is the thing that gives you motivation, passion, energy, and also mental clarity. So when prolactin is high, dopamine tends to be too low. You tend to struggle with those things. If you force yourself to have energy and mental clarity with stimulants or stress chemicals, then that is a strategy that will work for a certain period of time. But what you tend to still not have that dopamine gives you is like a joy of life and like a genuine enthusiasm for things. And so that would, so if you have a lot of energy and focus, but you also have high prolactin, maybe ask yourself if you have enough joy in your life, and that might be how it's manifesting for you. And it can cause other issues like gynecomastia and like excessive feminine traits in men if it is excessively high. I used to have very high prolactin. I still had none of that, but I did have like a lack of clarity and some like low dopamine symptoms. So those are the most common hormones that are tested in the medical tests. I've talked about before in one of our episodes about how I actually, think that in some cases it's some of the other hormones that are more interesting, that are very hard to test for, but I'll talk about that a bit later. But that's still a great starting point. Oh, and I forgot the other one, because we already talked about it a bit, and it's thyroid, right? So thyroid hormones are super, super important. We've done a whole episode about it. We talked about it a lot in other episodes. So I won't go into that here, but basically, the reference ranges are for a medical condition, they're not for optimization, as we've talked about before. All of that is really great to do. Sometimes it's free, sometimes it's covered by insurance, and it's good to look at that. And it gives you indications, so a couple of examples. So my TSH was high. And it wasn't above the reference range in the UK, but it was above the reference ranges in most of the rest of the world. So that gave me a little tip. And then I tested the rest of the thyroid stuff. And then actually, it wasn't optimal. And so that led me in that direction. Another example, I saw a client who every single one of his readings was excellent, except for low levels of one of the white blood cells. That indicated to me maybe some kind of chronic infection, either that or recent infection. So there's something going on with the immune system. And then that made me want to, given that there was nothing else that seemed to be wrong, question what else is going on there, and then, go on to further testing in that regard. If another client, like the A1C was a little bit high, so then, look at their metabolism, look at their ability to metabolize carbohydrate, look at their ability to metabolize fat into fuel, see what might be going on there. And also, try and get into the root issue, why is the pancreas struggling in the first place? It's a whole thing. Another client, high level of cholesterol. One of the indicators for that is thyroid, but he had he had expensive testing, so I could already see all of that, and his thyroid levels are really not off. And I'm like, okay, so why is it high? And then I saw, some of the liver enzymes are high. Okay, so then, back to our detox episode. Again, don't know if it'll be out yet by the time you're watching this. But, as we talk about in detail in the detox episode, and in fact the cardiovascular health episode, having those high levels of cholesterol in the blood can be an indicator that the liver is overwhelmed, right? And so there was some evidence for that here. So in every case, do I want to do further testing to see what's going on? Yes, but it's an interesting starting point. And especially, as you said, a lot of people already have these results, so it can be really helpful. But if you don't, I'm not saying, it's not worth it then. It's often still a good starting place to do those medical tests. Also because, especially depending on what country you're in, maybe your doctor doesn't do these, right? So let's say you have a really high A1C, or you have, really low levels of hemoglobin in your blood or whatever. You can then go to your medical doctor and go, what about this? And they can test it and go, oh yeah, you should be on medication, right? So there is that most obvious thing. And it's, we could look at it as ruling out let's rule out a medical condition that a medical doctor can help with. Obviously, ideally, you first go to them, but I'm assuming you've already done that and they haven't been helpful. Then you can do your own test and you can go back to them and go, well, what about this then? Right? So that's one option. Now, if it's not something like that, let's say you go back to them with high liver enzymes and they go, oh, it's nothing, don't worry about it. Then you can go, well, okay, then let me do my own investigation. Let me do a tangent for a second about hormone testing then. We covered this before, but I'll just mention it for the sake of completeness. So if a person has issues with energy and stress, I absolutely would recommend looking at thyroid, but I mentioned briefly about DHEA and cortisol. So high levels of cortisol and low levels of DHEA can often be a sign of accelerated aging, premature aging. But this is not something that you're going to be able to get accurate indication for in blood test results. So getting saliva, this is often what the first test that I get people to do is what I just said, and saliva cortisol and DHEA. And if DHEA is not so easily available, just saliva cortisol. Again, obviously it depends on the situation, but so many people are stressed these days. So many people are struggling that, generally I'm working with people who have quite high intensity lives. So often, and they're complaining about tiredness and stuff like that. So often that is a great starting point. So everything I just said as a blood test. So where can you get that done? As I said, doctor, ideally. If not, it depends a lot on your country. And if you're in the US, it depends even in your state, I believe, what you're allowed to do.
That is true. That is very true. Because when we talked about this, the place that you recommended, I just went ahead and ordered it. And then they're like, they called me and said, hey, you need a doctor's prescription for this, only because of the state I'm in. So then I had to call my doctor and I'm like, can you write me a prescription for this? And then send it off and do that. So it's a little like that. But yeah, check if you are in the States, check for your state and what the parameters are around that.
Yes, and it's not always, just because the state has more of an emphasis towards liberty doesn't necessarily mean they do in this regard. So yeah, you can't assume either. I believe the worst one that I've come across is New York. They don't like you to do any of your own testing. But anyway, so yeah, that's an issue. But generally, most of the states, you can order these tests for yourself. If not, I personally find your medical doctors over there are quite helpful compared to some other countries. So as Chrissy says, you can always get them to just cooperate in many cases because they don't care. If you're paying for it yourself, what do I care, right? That's kind of their attitude a lot in a bit more of a capitalist setup than in some other countries. In the UK, there's lots of companies that do it, but I like one called Medichecks. That is the one when you deal with doctors, medical doctors who are private, they all recommend Medichecks. So I guess they assume that it is accurate. Again, none of this, there's no links today of anything where we make any money recommending anything. We're just helping. So that's a good service. In terms of everything I just said, that you can get it done in the UK. I've not found anywhere in the US that's anywhere near as cheap as the UK. I do a test called Ultimate Performance that includes everything I just said. It's 56 different markers. and that's for £200. Sometimes there's like 20% off offers on the site if you look for them or wait for them. So usually that's several $100s, all of that stuff I just said in the US. The saliva cortisol is easier to do in the US. That's kind of the opposite. In the UK, it's a bit trickier, but a company called Genova, which we'll talk about more in a minute, they still do it. It just takes ages to get your results with Genova, but I quite like them as a company, despite that. It's funny, their testing is like a 1 out of 10 in terms of ease to do the test, but their results are like a 10 out of 10 in ease to understand them once you get them. So, swings and roundabouts. I'd say Medichecks is pretty good as well in terms of ease of reading them. I often get these American people show me their test results and they're like written in a way that is not user-friendly for a layperson. I mean, it's fine, but it's not. It's like they make it as difficult as possible, whereas Medichecks, they make it as simple as possible for you to read your own results. And there's a medical doctor commentary at the top that kind of tells you what they would do based on getting these results. So very above board from a mainstream medical point of view. So in terms of the US, it depends so much, right? There's, I think, is it 3 basic labs that like have a monopoly in the US, and depending on what area you're in. I don't think there's any benefit over one of any other that I have discovered, and so just go for whatever is cheaper and available would be what I would say. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I was going to say, it just really depends because there are certain restrictions. I know we've been using, talked about Genova. It's when you do certain tests, and this I might be jumping ahead to something we'll do later on, at least here in the States, this is for the own education. Is that those certain named labs, because you'll have to go in for a blood draw, you will most likely have to contact a company that will come to the house and do the private blood draw for you. So that may be something that you'll have to inquire about, because those other labs, if you're ordering certain kits, if it's not just a simple blood prick test or a saliva or something like that, so there are the little other things to look into. It's a small additional cost, but they can really be very, very helpful, because some of these labs, they won't let you just come in if you've ordered a kit and you just need a blood draw for a kit independently of an order. There are some other places online here in the States where you'll do the order and it will go through those labs. So you just call those labs, book in for your blood draw, and it's pretty easy to get the results.
Yeah. So because of the amount of choice in the US and the amount of different companies and different states, it's really hard to recommend one specific thing. You've got to find out for yourself. That reminds me, we should point out the difference of the different types of blood tests. So there's basically 2 different types of blood tests. There's the finger prick and there is the IV draw. So the finger prick is way easier. It's basically a little thing. It's the same thing that diabetics use, not to inject insulin, but just to test the sugar in their blood. It's like a little lancet thing. And then sometimes you got to drip it into a little tube, and sometimes you just drip it onto this card in these spots called a dry spot test. And it's something that's pretty easy to do yourself. If you have someone to help you, it's even easier, but you can do it yourself. It doesn't cost any money. You can do it when it's convenient to you. So that's pretty convenient. The other type, but some types require an IV test. Don't assume because one company requires an IV test that necessarily it will be the case for another one. Like if you really want to do the finger prick one because you don't have time to drive somewhere, or you want to save the money, and then often there is a test available that will do the finger prick test. But for some things, especially I mentioned earlier, red blood cells, you have to get the IV draw for that one. And there are various things that you do. So if money is an issue and time is an issue, you might want to limit yourself to the tests that you can do just with the finger prick test, which is quite a lot of the ones I've mentioned so far. The hormones, the liver function, the cholesterol, the blood sugar, most of it, basically, kidney function, all of that, the nutrients, vitamin D, B12, iron, all of that stuff you can test just with a finger prick test. It's pretty easy. Okay, so let's talk about the next level. So once a person does that, what do I recommend next? It totally depends, right? However, I definitely have my go-to favorites, because the ways that the body can go wrong are so numerous that literally, it takes 8 years of medical school plus countless years of, training to understand all the different ways the body can go wrong. And that's where, I do not have anywhere near the expertise of that as a doctor, right? I do not understand all the different ways the body can go wrong. But when it comes to what are the root causes, there's definitely more than one, right? So in the alternative world, it's often oversimplified. Just eat this diet, right? And everything will be resolved, or just take this product or whatever. No, it's not as simple as that. But it also doesn't require 8 years of full-time study to understand all the root causes. All the root causes tend to be similar. And we just talked about it. I'll just mention it again. The wrong level, some kind of building block. The wrong level, some kind of toxin, which is another word for poison in your body. The wrong level, some kind of hormone, and some kind of dysfunction with, one or more of the organs or systems of the body. That's basically what we're looking at and what we're talking about. So there are, there's not that many tests you need to do to really test a lot of that. The one that is the trickiest and the most expensive and the most broad is the toxin one, because there's so many toxins in our day and age. So that's often the hardest one. But in terms of the other ones, not too hard. So in terms of the function of the organs, I just said that those tests aren't super reliable. That's true. But what they do tell you is it's not seriously bad yet. Like we talked about, medically seriously bad yet. So that gives you some indication, right? So, or it is starting to get medically seriously bad. That's the other thing, right? And then we also need to know that. And you can get false positives as well as false negatives. I'm not saying this is perfect, but I'm saying it's better than nothing. It's just like, like if you're using Google Maps to get somewhere, does it occasionally lead you down the wrong road? Yes. But are you more likely to find it with a map than just trying to guess? Yes, right? So it's a similar kind of process. It's not perfect, but, the other alternative that we have is a very highly tuned intuition of ourselves or others. But if it's someone else's, then we're dependent on them, and there's still that issue like we talked about earlier. You never know if they're right or not, for sure. And then if it's our own intuition, look, if you've got that intuition that is so accurate that you can be genuinely confident about it, not delusionally confident, but genuinely confident, good for you. But the vast majority of us are not in that position, right? Maybe we're not connected to our intuition, or maybe our intuition is just not reliable enough that we can make life, risking decisions on it. And then that's where testing can be really helpful. So, let's talk about building blocks. So that generally will be the thing that I do next for practical reasons. So, and in this regard, as Chrissy knows, the thing that I usually say is, if you can possibly afford it, do a Nutreval. So Nutreval is a test that comes from Genova Diagnostics. It's extremely user-friendly to use. It's a bit of a hassle to take the test, I'll be honest with you. A bit of messing around. Nothing major. It's not going to, you don't have to take a day off or anything, but it's also not a 2-minute thing. You might have to sit there for half an hour and work it all out, basically. So it's not as easy as it possibly could be, but it certainly shouldn't stop you from doing it either. So what is a Nutreval test? So a Nutreval is actually just like I like the ultimate performance for Medichecks, because one of those markers out of 56 that the ultimate performance gives you might cost £50, or you can get all 56 markers for £200. So that's why I like it. You get a lot of value for money in terms of, a breadth of all these different results. Nutreval is a little bit similar. It tells you so many different things that even though the cost is quite high, so the Nutreval is giving me well over 100 markers. One of them was lead. If I just want to retest lead, the lead will be a third of the price of the Nutreval that contains over 100 markers. So I often think, I may as well just do the Nutreval again, right? Because why would I test for only one marker if I can just test for, over 100 again? So actually don't know if it's over 100. I don't want to misquote. It's over 50 at least. Let's put it that way. I often think of it as more because it gives indications of so many other. I think it's over 100. Something like that. Whatever. Let's say it's at least over 50. It gives you a lot of very, very helpful markers. So what is a Nutreval? For this one, I'm actually going to be willing to show people.
And that Nutreval, that's doing the urine, saliva, and blood draw.
It's not doing saliva unless you get an extra.
Cheek swab, right.
Yeah, and I would not bother with that extra.
Right.
They will charge you for like a couple of snips. The same as another company will charge you for every snip that is commonly tested. So I do not personally recommend that, just again through cost benefit. But it's a combination of urine and blood. Yeah, I wonder if I should describe it or show it. I'll briefly describe it and then we'll show it. So briefly, it's testing something called organic acids. This is the most dubious part of the test from a medical point of view. There's a lot of disagreement about how valid those results are. From a mainstream point of view, however, not just to me, but to many practitioners of functional medicine, nutritionists, all kinds of alternative practitioners, and in fact, a bunch of medical doctors who specialize more in optimization and who understand nutrition. It's very helpful. So it's way more mainstream than, I don't know, like bioresonance, like reading the energy or something. But it's still, if you take it to a totally normal medical doctor, they might well dismiss it. So this is kind of in between. However, it doesn't just test that. It also tests the levels of a bunch of key nutrients in the blood, which are not usually covered in those medical tests, but are very important. And it tests the best way, which I'll show you when we talk about examples, in many cases. And it also tells you your levels of the 4 most common toxins. And again, in the blood. It's one thing to have toxins in your hair, but then that tells you what your body's excreting and or just what you're bathing in, right? So it's never fully reliable. Toxins in the urine can be helpful and reliable depending on which one it is. But again, it's telling you what you're excreting. It's still, on its own, I don't feel like it's enough. I want to see what's in the blood. Because if it's in your blood, it's in every organ of your body and every system of your body. And every gland in your body, right? It's affecting everything. So if it's in your blood, A1, that is an issue. So I want to know that. It also tests some other stuff like homocysteine, which is a great indicator of, well, first of all, methylation function. But second of all, it's a very good predictor for future serious health outcomes like heart disease. So that's a really good one to do. And some medical doctors do actually test that. In the US, I've noticed that's more common. I don't ever see it in the UK labs, but the US labs do sometimes offer it. And there are levels of all kinds of amino acids in the urine, which tells us if there is an excess your body's trying to get rid of, or if there's very little of it, that can indicate a deficiency. And then there's the organic acids, which will be easier to show rather than tell.
We're going to take a quick break to share with you one of our amazing sponsors, Genetic Insights. What makes Genetic Insights uniquely valuable is that they test over 83 million different variants, which guarantees a 99.7% accuracy on all of their DNA reports. With over 100 reports available, you get comprehensive insights into what your DNA is telling you about how to optimize your health today and in the future. I found reviewing my results to be incredibly accurate and applying some of the recommendations, which are personalized to your individual DNA, to be extremely helpful for me and my family. I also loved how easy it was to upload my raw DNA data that I already had from previously using Ancestry.com, because Genetic Insights supports uploading raw data from all major platforms. To get your health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and get 20% off today by using coupon code Rejuvenate. Remember that supporting our sponsors supports our podcast, which allows us to keep sharing this important information with you free of cost. So, go get your Genetic Insights health reports by going to geneticinsights.co and use coupon code Rejuvenate for 20% off today.
Okay, I was considering actually showing my medical test results, but I thought there should be some barrier of privacy, but I'm happy to share my nutritional test results anyway. So I'm going to do that here as an example of what you get. So as you can see, it's very user-friendly and very interesting. I will not be able to explain it all. It require at least one episode of just going into this, and Chrissy's doing a whole course on this. There's a lot to say about this. I will not go through all of it, but I'll just give a couple of highlights to give examples of how helpful it can be. So in my case, I got my results back, and I was like, okay, I've got some struggling with mitochondrial function. And this, by the way, is when I was feeling pretty unwell. And to be honest, these are not the worst results that I've ever seen someone have, to put it mildly. Some of them are in green, which means, not bad, as it says. And some of them are in yellow, which means not great, but still okay. So I've definitely seen worse, but I was really struggling, and this kind of provided the answers, or some of the answers I needed. The other answers were in the area of thyroid support, which I've talked about in a previous episode. So that came more from the medical test results. But this was really more of a game changer for me. So as you can see, like, what jumps out as you as a complete layperson as what might be my problem, right? It's here, toxin exposure. This is the highest number, right? So straight away that gives us an indication of what might be going on. Now you can see how helpful this is. So we talked about genetic insights. We can give recommendations about how much you need of each nutrient that are based on like your general genetics, right? You tend to need more of this, you tend to need less of that. But this is specific to the snapshot of, how you have been recently. So in this case, I had an elevated need for B vitamins and magnesium and also some amino acids. The amino acids are interesting. Like, this is not foolproof, but I often find this is quite helpful. So if someone is low in lysine, they tend to need immune system support. And sure enough, lysine was there. If someone is low in one of the branching amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine, especially several, it often means they need muscle support. And so remember, when I did this test, I was 63 kilos. Now I'm 85. So making sure I had enough branching amino acids is part of that transformation. And again, I'm not saying, not fat, muscle, without doing any actual work to put on muscle. So I think that, getting the right levels of nutrients is a key aspect of that. So anyway, that indicated that I needed that support. And then tyrosine being like needing a lot more tyrosine, that indicates to me a state of stress, but also a lot of mental activity. And so your body's low in the building block of dopamine. And tyrosine is the building block of dopamine. It's also the building block of thyroid hormone. And it's also the building block of melanin, a specific, the skin pigment that makes your everything darker, skin, hair, eyes, etc. So I was depleted in tyrosine. So that was helpful to know. So what did I do? I started taking the nutrients that it said I needed more of, like the vitamins and magnesium. I was already taking a lot of magnesium, so this was interesting to see, but it's absolutely accurate, as I'll show you later, further down. And I started taking more of these amino acids. So then I'll skip through a lot of this. As I said, we could talk about this for so long, but I'll...
yeah, it's quite an in-depth test with so many things. It really is.
It shows you a lot, and I'll just skip ahead. So, it showed my glutathione was a little bit low. That's one of your body's primary antioxidants, but not crazy low. So that wasn't my main issue. That wasn't my main problem. But yeah, I'll just skip. So it probably is over 100, right? If we look at all of them. So it shows level of, every amino acid. You can see tyrosine was so low that there's basically none detected in the sample. So that's an indication the person does not have enough of it. Same with isoleucine. So this is interesting. So, I don't know if it will be out yet, but we've done a whole episode of metabolism. But this is like a snapshot of your metabolism in a sense. And you can see I was definitely struggling metabolism wise. I wasn't struggling so much with this bottom area, which was antioxidant support to deal with free radicals. Most people have heard of free radicals and antioxidant. So that wasn't the issue. But it was more that my body was not very good at converting carbohydrates and fats into fuels. And of course, if you're not very good at converting food into fuel, you can have an issue with your metabolism. And so that's what was going on there. And how do I know that? I'll just use this as one example. Again, I'm not going to go into detail about everything. So high levels of, and again, as I said, this is not something the mainstream doctors will understand, but a lot of, open ones will. So high levels of adipic acid and subearic acid. High level of adipic, very high level of subearic acid. What does that mean? Well, you can see if you have enough magnesium and vitamin B2, then your body will be able to do this thing called beta oxidation with the fat, which then means it can turn it into acetyl-CoA, which then means it can go into the citric acid cycle and ultimately be turned into ATP and energy. When these levels are high, it means that not enough of it is being oxidized and turned into fuel. Does that make sense, Chrissy?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
Because it's not going down the path it should, which I'm tracing on my cursor. I don't know if you can see it, from fatty acids to beta oxidation to acetyl-CoA. It's going down another backup pathway. And you can see there, it tells you these are the cofactors that help it go down that pathway. Cofactors is the technical term. That support those enzymatic reactions. And so because of that, it's saying, now there are other reasons for making these recommendations, but it's going to recommend to me you need more magnesium and you need more B2 because this system is struggling. So do you see how that's a different basis for recommending a nutrient? You could have an optimal amount of magnesium in your blood, but if this system is struggling, you could say, well, maybe you need more still. Right? Now, it turned out actually magnesium was also low in my blood. So it was an easy no-brainer to go for magnesium in this case. But that indicates these are other reasons why things are recommended. Another common one for this is vitamin B12. So, the vitamin B12 in the blood is known to be not super accurate. But there's another thing called methylmalonic acid. It's one of these methylation markers here. I'm just highlighting it in blue. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. So that is considered by those who know generally a more reliable marker as to whether you need B12 or not. If it's elevated, that means that your body doesn't have enough B12. So I hope that kind of a couple of examples like that indicates how this is making those recommendations. It's partly making them based on just with the main nutrients, how high levels you have in your blood. But it's also basing it on, do we have indications that some of these systems within your body are struggling?
Absolutely. And I just want to make one point as well on that beta oxidation too. Another thing that sometimes can be also offered or maybe potentially looked at is whether an individual has enough carnitine in their system for the carnitine transport chain to help get those fatty acids inside the cell into the citric acid cycle.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, great point. Yeah, there is definitely more to it. Yeah, like a simple breakdown. And then, I mean, another reason could be, I know this is a controversial statement, but if someone's having 80% of their calories come from fat, this situation is more likely to happen, right? Because they're just having a lot of fat to deal with. So that's, there are many reasons for it. It's not only a lack of cofactors, but it's an indicator, right? And that's why, what this does, I don't think it's anywhere near as advanced AI as we have genetic insights, but it's still a bit of an advanced AI that kind of calculates all of those factors together and then make some recommendations, which are generally pretty helpful. So, another thing that's kind of interesting to understand, again, based on this is, most people, at most, they know about omega-3 and omega-6. This will tell you your level of all kinds of different omega-3s. Some you may have heard of, like DHA, and some that you probably haven't, like DPA. Ditto, different types of omega-6. You may have heard of GLA, the stuff that's in evening primrose oil, but you may not be as familiar with DTA, for instance. So it's kind of telling you your levels of all those things. I take this one with a little bit of a pinch of salt because this is still based on reference ranges. So I can't prove this, but I think having your omega-6s below that reference range is not a bad thing. And especially what you want is a good ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. So mine in this test was actually not too bad. At the end here we have, we see some, significant deficiencies. So this is actually in the blood. This is plasma part of the blood. So copper was low. That's definitely an issue for hormonal health, skin health, immune health. Can cause lack of anemia, even if iron and other factors are optimal. So that's not good. The magnesium and potassium are also low. This is pretty common if someone has high levels of stress. Now, this could be due to emotional stress, but of course, the real culprit for the stress, I'll point out in a second. And then the selenium is also low. And so selenium is essential for lots of processes in the body, thyroid being one of them. And my thyroid was struggling back when I did this test. And, it's a powerful antioxidant and loads of benefits again. Could do a whole episode just on selenium. But, it indicated that some nutrients were, significantly low. But the real culprit, from my mind, was the lead, as I've talked about in other episodes.
High.
It is crazy high. So the reference range it talks about is in the 95th percentile. So above 2.81 means you're in the top 5% high lead, right? And it's like 10 times that. So I don't know exactly. It doesn't tell me, but I think it's, less than 1% of people would have lead that high. Maybe even 0.1. I'm not quite sure. It's not good. And I looked it up in the World Health Organization. I read their whole guide about how to deal with lead. And basically, if it's above 45, that's where a person would be hospitalized. If it's above 5 for a child, then that's really serious and they need treatment because the child is still growing. Anyway, it's a big deal. So once I found that, I was like, that's my big issue. Not my only issue, obviously. We just highlighted several. If you're eagle-eyed, you might have spotted others. But that can mess everything else up, basically. Like you have that high level of a toxin like that, it can put your body into a stress state, which then, will deplete the potassium and the magnesium and to some degree, other things like the selenium as well. So it's an issue. The vitamin D was low in the range, but these days I've kind of changed my perspective on this a little bit. I don't think this is a bad amount, actually. I feel like excessive vitamin D is as bad as not enough. I think it's a factor in over-calcification of tissues. So not enough vitamin D is not good, but too much is also not good. Just like with iron, you just need the right amount. So I'm happy with it being in that range personally. And then the homocysteine was fine. A little bit low for the range, but the thing that usually indicates you've got a higher chance of all these serious diseases like heart disease and stroke is when it's too high. So that's okay. So the test results showed, actually not that bad, especially for a first result, but that was a massive problem that would undermine everything else. The only reason it didn't give me a 10 or something like that is because almost everything else was fine. It's not like I was really high in loads of other things, but that level of lead itself was like a 10. So that was really, the issue. And I just want to show you, what the most recent test result was like, just so you can see the difference, like the improvement that can happen when you know what you actually need to improve, right? So we talked, most people are spending all their time on solutions, whether it's cleanses, supplements, herbs, energy healings, nutrition, whatever, without actually knowing the problem, right? So that's the benefit of the testing. So in this case, not perfect still, right? And this is because, well, I'll talk about the omega thing in a second, but that lead is extremely hard to get out of your system. It takes a long time. Some people say it's impossible to support it leaving. You just have to wait and remove the exposure. Some people say you can support it, but it's a slow process. But yeah, in these other areas, great, and that tells me I don't need to spend a lot of money or time or effort on antioxidants, right? I don't need antioxidant support. It's all fine. Would I be better off if I had a bit more glutathione maybe or something? Maybe, right? I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm just saying it's not necessary. And ditto with mitochondrial function. I think this is partly because I took the nutrients they recommended, but I think it's also partly because I started taking thyroid hormone in the glandular form. And so then your mitochondria just works better. There's still some of these that are a little bit off, but like this one, alpha ketoglycolic acid, it's more of an issue. It's high rather than low. This one, the omegas, it basically just says my omega-6s are too low, which, as I said, I am not of the opinion that that's accurate. I'm of the opinion that it's not true to say you want them to be as low as possible, but it is true to say that you probably want them lower than the reference range because most people are way overdosed on omega-6s. Omega-6s were barely a part of our diet until really 40 years ago, and seriously, and 100 years ago, they weren't part of our diet at all. And then suddenly they're like the number one source of fat that all of us are eating who eat normal food. So I don't have an issue with that being lower. If you disagree, I am happy to hear your perspective. And if you disagree and you have a good argument for it, I'm even happy to have you on the podcast, and I'd like to hear your perspective. But that's my understanding as of now. So some of these things still off, still need B vitamin support, still need magnesium, but it's not as much. And so if I go to, just look at those elements at the end. So I got my copper now to a reasonable level, my magnesium to a reasonable level. Oh yes, and I was going to talk about this. Do you see underneath magnesium, potassium, it says RBC there, Chrissy? So RBC means red blood cell. This is really important because the criticism that's made of like testing magnesium in the blood, like when your doctor might even test your magnesium in your blood and your potassium, but the thing is, the levels in your blood are very tightly controlled, so you could be really deficient in magnesium and it'll still look normal in the blood. The red blood cell tells you the level of the magnesium in your cell, not floating around in your bloodstream. So it's way more of an accurate indicator. So in fact, if we go back to my other test where it said it was low, I had done a medical test that said my magnesium was normal. So this indicated that that wasn't accurate. And so then I supplemented with a lot of magnesium. Or I can do a shout out to one of our products, actually, our magnesium glycinate. Feel younger, really good quality, and the best absorbed form of magnesium. So I really pounded that, and I got it up to a normal level. And I feel, the benefit of that, better sleep and more ability to relax and all that kind of stuff. Although it does, so many different things, of course, it's hard to really calibrate it. And then, basically everything in the green level, except that potassium, still an indication of some stress.
Better than where it was before, though. Yeah,
it's certainly better. But, I'd like to improve that. I'm still working on that one. But I think this is the culprit, right? That lead, I got it down to 6 from 27. But that's still top 2 or 3%. And so this is really helpful to understand as well when I live such a healthy lifestyle and do so many things for health. And then I still am not perfect. I still have this issue or that issue. And I'm like, what's wrong with me? I used to be. And now I'm like, oh, this is what's wrong with me. Yeah. I mean, maybe there's other stuff as well, right? And, there's a few other things maybe indicated here, right? That are definitely not perfect. But to me, that's really the big one. And that's also what it indicates, right? Like if I'm right about this low omega-6 not being a real issue, then, the Nutreval's successfully isolated, this is your problem, right? Yeah. It would be 0.0007. Like, oh, okay. So, that's the issue. That's what we're dealing with. And that homocysteine has stayed pretty much exactly the same. So we won't go into it too much detail. I want to talk about other tests, but it's just an example of how helpful it could be. And I also wanted to show you, because unlike a lot of the other tests, this one is so user-friendly, just show you what it actually looks like. Now, I will actually pull another couple of examples here. Let me go back to my older test. Okay, so in this case, in terms of further testing, now obviously with that lead being so high, I then did a follow-up and I did like a test of all my heavy metals, because if the body is struggling to process one heavy metal, it might have a backlog of more than just the 4 that this test did. So I did another test, which is the ZRT, you Americans would call it.
Yes.
Like urine and blood, heavy metals and trace elements test. I can't remember. It's called something like that. And that was also testing some other things. And I think the bromine was really high on that as well, which is one of the halogens that can build up in the thyroid and create issues, as well as other glands. So that was useful to know as well. That there were other, but it wasn't super useful. There wasn't like much other information that I got from that. But that, if you see that your body is struggling with toxins, so you see these toxin detoxification markers. I think the only reason that they weren't quite healthy is because of the amount I was doing to be healthy. But if I had that level of lead and I wasn't doing everything I did to be healthy, these would be in a red zone as well. These would be, problematic. At least some of them. And so from there, again, it might indicate further testing. These ones I often look at to indicate further testing: dysbiosis and yeast fungal. In fact, all of this category, from malabsorption, dysbiosis marker down to cellular energy, I would look at that. With this one, it actually didn't look too bad. Again, I've seen much worse, but we still got some of the things in the yellow here. So with that, I might consider doing a digestive health test. Either a cheaper one that, depending on what it says. I mean, dysbiosis means generally bacteria. So the dysbiosis ones were the only ones that were high. Oh yeah, in fact, I did have one high one there, that one, DHPPA. Then I might do a bacteria test, which in fact is what I did. And I did a biome site test. If just the yeast fungus ones were high, I might do just a yeast fungus intestinal test. And if it was generally high and the malabsorption was high, then I would definitely recommend a broad digestive function test, like a GI effects test. I think that's the Genova version of it. And I'm familiar with the company Genova. I like them. As I said, very user-friendly results. So, but there are other companies that do kind of similar ones. And they're basically testing for a bunch of stuff. I'll talk about that in a minute.
I was going to say, we'll make a quick point here, as we were discussing earlier about certainly doing it in stages, because maybe somebody's going to go like, oh my goodness, I have to look at my mitochondrial function. I have to do all this and do all that on top and then look at the yeast. But you made a good point before we were started recording about there's a couple of things to do first and then do the next things once those have been addressed. Correct? You want to quickly just say what that is now?
Yeah, I think I've tried to present it in the order of what I said. So start off with those looking at those medical test results that we've already talked about, right? If there's an issue there, if there's a hormone off, if there's signs of anemia, if there's signs of blood sugar issues, whatever it may be, start with that. Either addressing it, or if you have to, more testing to find out more information. So that is the first thing. If a person's suffering with, as I said, stress and exhaustion, maybe depression of the type where I have no motivation, energy to do anything, which often I feel is back to energy, it's really an energy problem, then I would also recommend the saliva cortisol and DHEA, like I talked about. But generally hormones, right? It could be testosterone, could be prolactin, could be progesterone, could be a few different things. So generally hormones. And definitely if a person's low on energy, then anemia and all that stuff. Basically, all the stuff I talked about is just generally good to know, no matter what the symptom is, right? Often you don't realize, like, issues with the liver or issues with the thyroid or issues with the blood sugar, like the symptoms of that are so universal, they could affect almost anything, that it's good to just know what those levels are. It's good to just test that. Beyond that, the Nutreval, if there's nothing specific that comes up from that, and yet it doesn't answer the questions about what's going on with a person, the Nutreval is the next one that I go to, because again, it's so broad, and even though it's not cheap, in terms of value for money, I mean, reviewing it again, it looks like, yeah, as I said, it's over 100 different things it's analyzing. So, it's whatever it is, $5 or $6 per marker. It's giving me a lot of helpful information. And that's why I actually wanted to show, right? Because I can look, does the person look like they have a nutritional deficiency? Do they have a metabolism problem? Do they have an energy problem? Do they have a methylation problem? Do they have they might have a yeast fungal problem. They might have a dysbiosis problem. They might have a malabsorption problem. They might have a toxicity problem. Like they might have a lack of antioxidant issue. I see that commonly in people. Like, even though it wasn't the thing that was my issue, many other people do have the issue. There's so many things that then, and again, oftentimes it's enough, right? Like, it just says, oh, you're really low in these nutrients. Well, that's easy to deal with, right? I can either increase, with certain things like zinc, right? If you're a vegan taking zinc, you can say, do you want to go back to eating meat, or do you want to supplement it, right? Either way, fine. Or it doesn't have to be meat. It could be oysters, right? Like, but you can deal with that quite easily, right? If it's some kind of toxic issue, that's more of a challenge. Often it requires further testing. Mine was unusual that it was so high. It was like, well, okay, I guess that's it then. I did do further testing anyway, but the lead really was the main thing. When there's mitochondrial dysfunction, that does indicate to me mycotoxins may be involved if there's no other obvious culprit. So I would, if a person can afford it, I would do a mycotoxin test. That is basically where they check the level of these mycotoxins in the urine. Mycotoxins are the chemical warfare agents that molds create to kind of like battle their enemies, other molds and other organisms. So that's something, they're very, very toxic. The government classes them along with asbestos in terms of like the level of danger of having them in a house. So that might be something that I go to. Yeah, and those are really the starting points. I mean, anything else I could say, now we're getting more and more specific, right? I didn't even show this when I went to the Nutreval, but, you know, it gives markers for the stress chemicals, right? Like how high is the dopamine? How high is the serotonin? How high is the GABA? How high is the norepinephrine? It gives indicators for all of those most important neurotransmitters as well. Doesn't do cortisol, but we talked about that with the other tests. So that's like a really broad understanding to look at all of the stuff that I generally talk about that we could look at optimizing. I really like it for that. Now, again, there may be specific things, but that's so case by case. So that's a really good starting place, basically. I talked about the GI effects. I said we can go into a little bit more detail about that. So there's so much talk these days that has a lot of truth to it, that all illness comes from the gut, that the gut is the root of all illness. This is something that's been said in Eastern medicine for a very long time. So, and again, like trying to work out what it is, right? Is it leaky gut? That reminds me. And this is one of the other tests I commonly recommend that people do. If it's not something obvious, especially, but even if it is something obvious, it's always good to do, but especially is a good idea to do if it's not something obvious. And actually the client you were asking me about earlier, Chrissy, I'd recommend it for them, is food intolerances, a broad spectrum food intolerance. Why is that important? Because if your body is acting like it's being poisoned when it's not, one of the reasons for that could be because it's treating a food or even something else like an inhalant as a toxin, like gluten, but it could be anything, right? It could be the protein in any food, even food you never think. I'm still amazed at how I often see foods that are supposed to be completely fine, like, I don't know, rice, which is supposed to be hypoallergenic and fine for everyone, or, I don't know, different fruits and vegetables that, you know, are supposed to be healthy and harmless. Like, people have real issues with them, right? They can't eat them. And not just that the test results say that, but then they stop having it and they're like, oh my God, my issue's gone away. You know, I talked about this in another interview recently. Someone who had chronic stomach ulcers for 20 years, and then they basically stopped eating all the so-called healthy foods that they had started eating in their 20s because someone told them that it's good for them, and went back to eating not supposedly very healthy foods, and everything got better, not because the experts are necessarily wrong about which food isn't healthy, but because a healthy food that you're intolerant to is way more toxic to you than a not great food that you're not intolerant to. Right? Does that make sense? So you may say that, I don't know, soy or gluten or whatever is bad for you, and often those things are bad for someone with an intolerance tendency, but they're actually not as bad for you as broccoli or peas or whatever if you have an intolerance to those things. So intolerance really trumps a lot of things. So I'm a big fan of people testing that as well. In terms of where they go, I can't remember the name of the company off the top of my head that I like now, but I'll make sure we include it as a link underneath the video, Chrissy, if you want to ask me. Generally, the ones that you find yourself with Google are rubbish. I've tried it myself. You may as well use like a dowsing crystal or something like that for the level of accuracy that they have. Or whatever.
Yeah, I was going to say, because that brings me to the point. It's like, okay, well, what type of test? Like, is it best if they're going to use hair or saliva? Like, how do you know? How do you know that this test is going to be accurate?
The tests that do hair, again, this is energy medicine. This is not real science. The only thing that's real science from any kind of vaguely scientific point of view is IgG and IgE levels in blood. And there's, what's the word? There's refinements within that, right? So there are different ways of testing that, and some companies claim their way's better, and some companies claims that their way's better. But if you're not testing that, you're not really testing food intolerances from a strictly scientific point of view. You're just, doing something. Look, if you use one of those other methods and it was accurate for you and it was helpful for you, fantastic. I have not found it to be accurate and helpful. I've not found it to be accurate and helpful for others. So I'm not dismissing it because it doesn't fit in with my theory. I'm dismissing it because, in my opinion, they are not correct. They are not accurate. However, even a lot of the companies that sell the blood tests are not accurate and not correct, in my opinion. The ones that you just find if you're looking yourself. The ones that practitioners recommend tend to be better and also more expensive, maybe coincidentally. And so this is a thing, again, when cost is an issue, you can go, well, I could just test the most common foods, which tends to not be that expensive. But often I find it's like obscure stuff that a person is eating a lot of that is a problem or one of the problems. So if you can possibly afford it to do a broad one, it's better. Now, generally people have either a lot, they have more money or they have more time. You're very unfortunate if you have neither, but in the developed world, people tend to have at least one of those assets available to them because they're either working or not, basically. So if you really are low on money but you're high on time, that's fine, because arguably the very best intolerance test anyway is just the exclusion diet. So you just don't eat any of it for a week at least, ideally 2 or 3, and then you eat a massive amount of it and then see what happens. That's still more reliable than any blood test, I would say. But there's like some of these tests you can test 250 different foods. To do that with every food that you eat might take a hell of a long time, so if you don't have a lot of time but you have some money, it's definitely a bit of a time saver to just do a blood test. It's a finger prick one usually. It's easy to do, and then it will tell you, you have an IgG reaction to, this. IgG means intolerance, and IgE means allergy. So allergy is something that happens straight away, and it's very serious sometimes. If nothing else, it is very quick on onset. If it's milder, because there are degrees of IgE. Whereas IgG is more, the symptoms could take up to 3 days to show up. Generally, if you have an IgE allergy, you already know it, but you often don't know the IgG because, maybe you eat a food and you feel worse the next day. You don't associate it. Like the way the human brain works is if I start to feel bad, I look around me right now, right? I don't think, what did I eat yesterday? So, or 3 days ago. So IgG are often really hard to work out. So that's another test that I do recommend pretty commonly as well. I'm trying to think if I forgot any others. I don't think so. I think that is the things that I usually go with. I think I missed out initially because, it is a specialized one. But when I was really thinking about it, I was like, you know what? It is specialized, but I actually use it commonly. But it's not the one I start with, unless the person already really thinks that's their issue. It's more like if we haven't worked out the other stuff, this could be it. And of course, it's not really a root problem because, as we talked about this in the allergies and intolerance issue, so the episode, so I won't go into it a lot, but in a nutshell, like there's still the question, okay, why is my immune system reacting poorly to these things, right? So that's more the other stuff that we've talked about, is it overburdened with poison? Is it missing some nutrient it needs? Is there some hormonal imbalance? It's back to those basic things again. But nonetheless, if you are struggling with that, if you constantly eat every meal or every time you eat, your body thinks you're taking in a massive amount of poison, of course you're going to be stressed. Of course your whole detoxification system is going to be overloaded. Of course your immune system is going to be overloaded. Of course you're going to be more vulnerable to outside infection. Like, it's such a cascade of problems that come from that even if by not eating those food, you're not resolving the root problem, you are giving your body a massive break that it can then have the energy to start addressing the root problem. Like, I actually find if you try and address the root problem with people, but they carry on eating those foods, it's really hard to help them. Like they do also have to address that. And some people I just can't, like they just can't go without bread or whatever it may be. And you can still help them, but God, it's so much more difficult if they refuse to stop eating the foods that their immune system thinks is poisoning them.
Very
it's
true.
possible, but it's hard.
Very true. Very true. So, Elwin, how often should somebody do these types of tests?
It's a great question. How much money you got? I mean, that's a factor. Some people actually get at least some of this, like their insurance to cover it, in the US. So that's great if that's the case. So let me answer first from the perspective if you have an unlimited budget, or just if this is important enough to you, you're willing to maybe sacrifice other things like a nicer car or whatever, because your health is your primary focus. So in that case, again, obviously, if you have a medical issue and then you need to involve a practitioner and they will decide. So I'm going to answer this question more from just if you're trying to optimize point of view. Or if you do have an issue, but your doctor refused to help you, like maybe I had with my lead, right? So I would say that doing the medical test, it really depends on if you had any issues with the results and if you have any symptoms. If your results were perfect and you didn't have any symptoms, probably once a year, like you're already doing, with your insurance company or whatever is right, Chrissy. But if you had things that were off, I would assume that you are trying to fix that or improve that. And so in that case, you want to see if what you're doing is working. And this is such a obvious statement, yet I see so little of it because people either don't do it or they outsource it to someone else, some practitioner, which is fine, as I say. But even I recommend seeing not just a practitioner, but several, right? I'm not against that at all. But I also recommend to, as you said at the beginning, Chrissy, to empower yourself to understand what's going on. Because even though you may not have anywhere near as much expertise as some of these other people, no one cares about your health as much as you. That is the reality. So again, we don't have to choose between do I pay attention to my results or does my practitioner pay attention to my results? You should both pay attention to your results. They bring the expertise, you bring the caring, right? And between the two of you, you've got the best chance of actually getting better. So in that case, if there's an issue, now, of course, is there any point in testing a week later? No, it's not enough time for whatever you've done to take effect, right? So it does depend a little bit what it is, but usually 3 months is pretty awesome if you can afford that. Occasionally, with a few things, I'll do it more often. Like at the moment, I'm testing something monthly. But if I weren't planning to share those results publicly, I probably wouldn't bother. And it's a really cheap test. It's whatever it is, $30. So it's not such a big deal. If we're talking about these more expensive tests, 3 months is pretty optimal. If you can't afford that, you don't have time or whatever, then just, beyond that as often as you can, every 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever months, right? Whatever you can do. I see a lot of people make this mistake. They do one test and they start to do what's recommended, like the Nutreval, it's easy, right? Oh, it's telling me I need more of this, this, and this, so I'll start taking it. And then they don't retest because of the money, or often I find because it works so well that they feel better, which is nice. But then I don't need it anymore. I don't need to, waste money or time. But the thing is, some nutrients that's okay with, like the Nutreval, I notice it points out most people need B vitamins. And technically, if a person just keeps taking B vitamins for years, it's usually fine because B vitamins are water soluble and it's very, very hard to build up like an excessive amount. But there are a lot of nutrients and even amino acids and fats that if you keep having a large amount, either through supplements or even through food for a long time, because some test told you that you should, you can very easily go from too little to too much. And obviously this is true with medicines, right? So, if something tells you have too high blood sugar and you start taking a thing to lower blood sugar, you want to make sure it doesn't go too low. Or if something tells you have too low thyroid and you start taking thyroid hormone, you want to make sure it doesn't go too high. So it's kind of obvious with drugs. And as I said, usually a practitioner is, monitoring that. And I say usually, I'm actually amazed at how often practitioners will prescribe people hormones and then not test them often enough, whether it's progesterone or testosterone or whatever. But anyway, but with the nutrients, it's less obvious that is something that you should retest because, it's zinc. Zinc's no big deal. Zinc's good for you, right? Well, actually, too much zinc is a really big deal. It's not good. First of all, too much of anything isn't good. And second of all, if zinc is antagonistic with copper, iron, and molybdenum to a lesser degree. So if you start having sky-high zinc because you're taking 50 milligrams a day because at one point you're deficient, after 3 months, you're probably going to be fine. But after 3 years, you may have caused a different problem by making your copper too low or making your iron too low. So you might say, okay, well, if that's the case, Elwin, surely I can just follow the recommendations for a few months and then stop. That's safe, right? Well, then, yes, that's safe in terms of you're probably not going to build up that excess, but you may have also not resolved the problem. So like you saw with my results, those were a year and a half apart, maybe, I think maybe almost 2 years apart. And you could see, even though, maybe I didn't go into this, but even though I've been taking loads of the thing, I was still deficient. So the other side of it is you may not be having enough, right? So just as you didn't know in the first place whether you needed it or not until you tested, you then don't know subsequently if you need it or not without testing. It sounds obvious, but again, I think the thing is most people really don't want to be focusing on health unless they have to. And I've been guilty of this as well in my past. And so as soon as you start feeling great, better than most people around you, you're like, great, I feel better than most people and I'm not, I don't need to take drugs like they do to, I don't need caffeine to have energy in the morning and I don't need alcohol to, have fun and all that stuff. So great, I'm doing great, right? But then, yes, you are. But, we're all subject to toxic assaults constantly. We're all subject to stresses, especially those of us who want to make a difference in the world or, have ambitions or whatever. Or maybe just, an artistic drive or whatever you want to call it. Or a need to help people or whatever we do that taxes us, all of us are aging, right? We're subject to sunlight, oxygen, all these forces that are essential for life and yet at the same time have an aging effect on us that are, slowly causing us to deteriorate. And so, especially if they're excessive. And so, again, this is down to, do you want to be okay or do you want to optimize, right? Like hormones will just extremely rarely be optimal by the time you're 40 or 50, even though you still have plenty of, working life to go, plenty of relationship life, whatever, certainly at that age, but your hormones are already not good. So usually. So is it a good idea to test regularly? If you possibly can, yeah. And I also want to ask the question, is it a good idea to save money by not doing them once you feel good? I mean, I've already answered that in terms of it could go bad again. But the other aspect of it is, let's say you're doing pretty well. The difference between pretty well and optimal could be the difference between a 5-figure income and a 6-figure income, or a 6-figure income and a 7-figure income. So even if you're a very economically minded person, which some people are, right? And that's fine. I feel it's false economy to save money on these things, because having wealth is not all about saving money. It's also about earning it, right? And earning it is about, hopefully it's about creating value in the world and not, the more nefarious ways of doing it. And so creating value in the world requires a lot of energy, and it requires a lot of mental clarity, and it requires a lot of, emotional fortitude and all that kind of stuff. And all that stuff is down to hormonal health. It's down to mitochondrial health. It's down to organ health. So it all comes back to the same thing. Yeah. And I'm very happy, delighted with the amount of clients that I do get who are on that path. I always feel a bit like I still haven't kind of overcome fully this mental block about it. Like, God, they're really doing a lot, and yet they're doing better than most people. But they're absolutely right. They should be. And maybe that's why they're doing better than most people, because they have that attitude. And I say they're doing better than most people, socially, financially, health-wise, right? They're doing great. And yet they're really invested in this more than most people I meet who are really struggling. And I'm like, that's not a coincidence, right? It's that always wanting to be better thing is inspiring. And, I have it, but when I see people have it more than me, I see how beneficial it is. So if you think we're going over the top, imagine who I'm talking about, who I think are maybe going over the top. But I don't think there is such a thing as over the top when it comes to this. There's over the top in terms of worrying too much, obviously, being anxious, like, oh my God, I've got this life-threatening disease every time you have some tiny symptom or niggle. That's obviously not great. But is it over the top to test really regularly and to keep tweaking and optimizing and perfecting? It depends on your goals in life, right? If your goal in life is just to like have an easy life and chill, then yeah, it's probably a waste of time. But yeah, it really depends on how important it is for you to be the best you can be and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it too. I think too, when some of these things, they can tally up, they can definitely add up. So it's like how to make that expense worth it in your mind, especially depending on your income or where you are and like where you're going to put your priority in that. So I think the level of testing, of taking a look, and like you said, where your goals are with it, really, really does matter, because it's, for me, I found it invaluable.
Yeah, you could say that it's investing. I like to look at it that way. I'm amazed at how much people spend on education, which is not a bad thing. Again, it's one of the main predictors of wealth and success. I'm not against education, but how they'll put so much into education and so little into this. And in reality, both are crucial. Like, you can have all the knowledge and understanding in the world. If you don't have the energy to implement it, or if you don't have, the emotional balance to implement it or whatever, then it's worse than useless, right? Then you know how to, I don't know, be a millionaire or change the world, but you can't make yourself do it. You'd be better off not knowing, right? So just, ignorance is bliss kind of thing. It's just chilling and enjoying life. So if you have that drive to do something significant, then absolutely invest in education. But I'd say also balance that with investing in your own ability to implement what you learn on a long-term sustainable level, which all the stuff we talked about today, I think, is really a part of.
What I know we're coming up towards our time. I just want to ask, why do you think doctors don't, well, some of them don't even know about, like, for example, the Nutreval, why aren't they prescribing or asking their patients, clients, to do this kind of testing?
Oh, conspiracy feeling time. How controversial am I going to be here? I haven't planned this. I think there's loads of answers that are obvious that you've probably heard before about they don't care about you being well, they only care about making money, and these pharmaceutical companies want you to be dependent on them and stuff like that. And there's probably truth, well, there is truth to all of that to some degree, but I actually think it goes deeper than that. I think it's a fundamental philosophical challenge. Like, the whole medical system, including the American one. So with the American one, the biggest complaint and accusation that's made about it is that, it's too expensive, they only care about profit, that, all of this kind of stuff, right? They don't care about helping people. They only care about making money. Okay. I actually don't see that as the biggest challenge. I see that as a big challenge, but I think the thing that's deeper than that is a bigger challenge. And what am I talking about? Because there are these, even though the US may have it worse than a lot of the so-called developed countries, the other ones are not that much better in terms of their health, even though they have, most of them have national health care where, there's not that profit motive. So to me, there's something else going on. And what it is to me is this difference between need versus prevent. Because we live in a world of limited resources, right? And so there's the perspective that's generally considered like the compassionate, and then there's the perspective that I would call wise, but people can label that however they want. And there's obviously values to both of those philosophies I just said, right? A world without compassion is a horrific world I wouldn't want to live in, and a world without wisdom, well, it's kind of the world I'm already living in, but it's also not great. So these are both wonderful, essential qualities. And I just feel like whenever one becomes too dominant over the other, in what I'm about to say, that's when there's issues. So there's obviously limited resources. We've just talked about this on a personal level, right? Like, I've only got so much money. What do I spend it on? And all that kind of stuff. But this is true societally as well, right? There's limited resources. Now, I just want to qualify. Do I think that we should be paying large amounts of money for weapons and all that kind of stuff and bank bailouts and all that stuff? No, I think that's terrible. I'm not on that side. I'm not on the side of whoever thinks that that's a good idea. Military interventions and bailing out huge companies and all the rest of it. But what I also think is that when there is a certain amount of resource that's allocated to something, so in this case, let's say people's health, there is a question of who do we give it to? Do we give it to the people who are dying right now? Or do we suffering right now? Or do we give it to the people to make sure they're not suffering later? Now, the compassionate approach is we've got to give it to the people suffering right now, right? They need it. And so that's the need approach, right? And this philosophy makes perfect sense on its face. Who do you give it to? The person who definitely needs it and is in pain, or the person who might need it? And you go, well, of course you give it to the person who definitely needs it, who's in pain or who's dying, right? It's the most obvious and logical thing in the world, especially to a compassionate person. And that is what our whole healthcare system is based on. Whether it's for-profit capitalist or whether it's nationalized socialist, it doesn't matter. When everyone goes into the hospital, your care is not usually given based on your social status. There's sometimes a little bit about like older people are given less priority than younger people. And there's a few things like that. When it comes to an organ transplant list, they'll give the organ maybe to someone with a healthy lifestyle than a less healthy lifestyle. But there's very little of that. And there's very much, we're going to see you based on your level of need. And that's it. That's the fundamental main criteria. So that's true in an emergency room, but it's also true for the whole healthcare system in general, right? This is why, and then there's the other thing is the basic tenet of do no harm. Now that is ludicrously misinterpreted in this day and age, in my opinion, but whatever. And it's also kind of going out the window. Like Canada these days is like really big on, promoting euthanasia and stuff like that. So that's generally a philosophy that is going out even in the most obvious sense. But still, there's this general idea of a large percentage of the total amount that's spent in health is spent on the last few days of keeping people who are very old and very sick and who many of them probably wish that they would die alive, right? That's crazy to me, but it makes sense based on the philosophy I just said. Who needs it more than the person who is dying? Even though it's a huge expense, even though it's, arguably a lot of the time people don't even want it because they're suffering so much. That's the way it's set up, right? So what that means is that there's not a lot left for the prevention, right? And so because there's limited resources, as I said, look, I wish there's way less spent on weapons and bailouts and way more on health. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is I don't think just spending more on the current healthcare system is going to help, because the current healthcare system is way over emphasizing this need thing. And so when I said earlier about the reference ranges and all that, as I say, in your country, you could maybe accuse the profit motive, but in my country, that's not what it is, right? It's only based on need. That's what it is. It's like, are you bad enough that with our limited amount of money and resources and doctors and time and all the rest of it, that you're worth dealing with yet? And again, as I said, from a moment-to-moment perspective, this makes total sense, because who am I going to prioritize? The person who might need it, who's fine, or the person who is desperately suffering, who definitely needs it immediately? Of course, I'll give it to someone who's suffering. But the challenge is, it's way, way, way easier, quicker, cheaper, wiser to help the person who doesn't need it yet to the person who's already in a desperate state. That's the challenge. And so, as I said, I'm not saying it should be one or the other. I'm talking about how imbalanced it is. Of course, we need care for people who need it, who are suffering, but I'm saying it's so in that direction. There's not nearly enough on the prevention and education and supporting and optimizing, right? From my perspective, if you did all this stuff, you would massively reduce the overall cost in healthcare, because yes, people would still die. We have not conquered the aging thing. But would they need 20, 30, 40 years of constant expensive care with all of these chronic health conditions? Yes, but nowhere near as much. Or certainly the cost, even if they still needed it, even if there's still quite a few people with those issues, the cost would certainly be offset. So that's, do you see what I mean? Like, that's why I think it's fundamentally a philosophical issue. It's not always been that way, right? From, before 200 years ago, it was basically, are you the king, queen? You get the healthcare first. Then are you aristocracy? It's like, and then if you're a peasant, then tough luck, unless you can, scrape together some money to pay for it. So this is a relatively recent change in our system. And again, I'm not saying it should go back to how it was before, where, it's totally based on, what you can afford and what your social status is, which often is what you're born in. It's, people who are born into a rich position don't deserve it. People who are born into a poor position don't deserve it. I'm not saying that's good, but I'm saying our current system is also not great for that reason. And we should think about what can we do to actually prevent it. Another health thing that you could do to prevent it, stop all these big companies poisoning the environment. Like, that's a huge factor. Like, things that are not, stop these huge companies poisoning the food, stop these huge companies poisoning the cosmetic companies. So I hope it doesn't come across that I'm on one side or the other politically. I'm kind of saying stuff that, from both sides, I would say, because they're true. I don't think it's about sides. I just think it's about the truth. But like, that's some of the best healthcare. And then I'm not a huge fan of like creating more and more laws to make everything illegal. But if you're going to ban stuff, how about banning the stuff that is genuinely detrimental, right? And some countries have started doing this, to be fair. I think like New Zealand banned smoking recently, and there's the argument that as soon as you ban it, then, it creates a criminal underclass and all the rest. I'm not saying that there are always simple answers to all these things, but we see, like in the US at the moment, what happens if you decriminalize every drug and let people take whatever they want. It's often not good for them, first and foremost, and second of all for everyone around them. It's not good for the individual. It's not good for the society that has the individual in. So yeah, I think like making things that are poisonous and toxic, first and foremost, again, not on the individual levels, but stopping the companies from doing it. Often they're adding these things because they're cheap, or they're adding these things because they're addictive. So first and foremost, that shouldn't be allowed. If you're going to ban anything, ban that, right? And then second of all, also, an incentive scheme with individuals to encourage them. And then there's the subsidies, they take our tax money that they take by force, and then they give it to people who are often creating the foods that are the worst for us health-wise, So there's so many things like that. And, I saw a political candidate recently, a Democrat who's actually talking about this for the first time ever, which is like fantastic. It's, about time someone actually, what about the poison, right? This is not right. This is not normal. So I'm delighted to see that. And I hope that many more people start talking about this as a result of that person kind of breaking the dam on that. Because if we're going to have politicians, what are they for if it's not for metaphorically stopping people poisoning the communal well, right? That's the whole thing. Like, if you need rules in a society, which you do, then stopping this, one person or one group poisoning everyone else should be one of the first things that we look at. It's, right along with murder and all these kind of things. It's a form of murder. So, Yeah, I guess that's broader than your original question. But back to the original question, it's a philosophical thing, and it's also like an ignorance thing in terms of ignorance of all the stuff I said, towards the end of that little speech.
No, I absolutely as well, because it's also too, it's like this isn't even being taught when people are going to school, as doctors or nutrition or things about toxicity. And so it's a whole overhaul that needs to come for everywhere. But you made some absolutely brilliant points. And the other thing to touch on it too, it's like for everybody to, like you just said, find out about these things, find out what's in your food, because as that report showed, there are toxins that are coming in, and whether your body can deal with it or not. And so it's like trying to limit that. I think we touched on that in detoxification as well. So, and that's highly important, highly important.
I'll give one silver lining. So from a compassionate point of view, there's not much of a silver lining. It's just really sad and horrible. But from a competitive point of view, this is, the best silver lining you're going to get, really. The fact that the fact that the vast majority of people are so clueless about this, or brainwashed, ignorant, whatever you might want to call it, that's an opportunity for you, if you're competitive, to shine, right? Because let's say you work in a big company, right? Everyone else is struggling to get by because of all this stuff. You do everything that we're recommending, you're going to be in the top 1%. You're going to be, all other things being equal, you're going to be the first in line to be promoted or whatever, right? So there's that advantage. If you don't care about any of that at all and you just want to make the world a better place, if you're more on that side of the philosophical spectrum, then it's an opportunity to help a lot of people, right? So a lot of people who have a lot of compassion also feel a lot of like, I want to be needed. I want to, I want to do something meaningful. And well, that's not difficult in this day and age, It's not difficult in this day and age to help people, because there are so many people who need help. There are so many people doing things that are making them worse or not understanding what they need to do and all the rest of it. So in either case, it's an opportunity. If you want to be better than others, then it's an opportunity to do that. And if you want to just help others, it's an opportunity to do that. So either way.
Well, you shared a lot today, Elwin. Thank you so much. Is there any other final thoughts before we close today?
Please tell us your experience of testing. As always, I'd love to hear in the comments on YouTube what has been most helpful for you. If there's tests that you would recommend that I have not mentioned, I would be interested in hearing about it. If you prefer this company or you prefer this test or whatever, please share. I'd love to hear it.
Beautiful. And thank you everyone for joining us. As usual, please, if you want more, if you are interested in this, please make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon so you get notified every time we release an episode. And we are so thrilled that you've joined us, and we are really thrilled to see you next time as well. So take care, and we'll see you again. I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, I want to tell you about a way that you can support the podcast while also getting great deals on high quality supplements that Elwin and I personally use, and that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is that they have great quality products with minimal fillers at a very affordable price. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and in my experience, they're very helpful and friendly. And the thing I love most of all is the amazing descriptions that Elwin has written about each product category on that topic. And each product has so much education on it that I've actually learned more from reading the descriptions than I have from a lot of articles. So to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, use promo code RejuvenateMe for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order using promo code RejuvenateMe at feelyounger.net.